Before starting the story, let us know where you're watching from and what time you're watching. The Woman with No Face. The rain fell in sheets, a relentless torrent that turned the narrow streets of Black Hollow into a labyrinth of shadows and whispers. The town, nestled deep within the forest, was a place where time seemed to stand still. Its cobblestone streets, ancient buildings, and the ever-present fog gave it an air of perpetual twilight. It was a place where secrets festered, and the past was never truly buried. I had come to Black Hollow seeking solitude. After the death of my wife, Emily, I could no longer bear the weight of the memories that haunted our home. The grief was a living thing, a specter that followed me wherever I went. I hoped that the quiet of this forgotten town would offer some respite, a chance to heal. But Black Hollow had other plans for me. The house I rented was at the edge of town, a crumbling Victorian mansion that loomed over the forest like a sentinel. Its windows were dark, its walls covered in ivy that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The real estate agent, a gaunt man with hollow eyes, had warned me against it. "The house has a history," he said, his voice trembling. "Bad things happen to those who live there." I dismissed his warnings as superstition. I was a man of science, a psychiatrist by trade. I didn't believe in ghosts or curses. But as I stood in the foyer of that house, the air thick with the scent of decay, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. The first night was uneventful. I unpacked my belongings, lit a fire in the hearth, and tried to make the place feel like home. But as the hours passed, I began to notice things small, unsettling things. The sound of footsteps in the attic, though I knew I was alone. The faint whisper of a voice, just beyond the edge of hearing. And then there were the shadows. They seemed to move when I wasn't looking, shifting and twisting in ways that defied explanation. I told myself it was my imagination, the product of an overactive mind and too much grief, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. The first time I saw her, I thought I was dreaming. I had fallen asleep in the armchair by the fire, the flickering flames casting long shadows across the room. When I awoke, the fire had died, and the room was bathed in an eerie, silver light. The rain had stopped, and the moon hung low in the sky, its pale glow filtering through the windows. That's when I saw her. She stood at the far end of the room, her back to me. She was tall and slender, her form draped in a tattered white gown that seemed to float around her like mist. Her hair was long and black, cascading down her back in tangled waves. But it was her face, or rather, the lack of it, that made my blood run cold. Where her face should have been, there was nothing but smooth, featureless skin. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just a blank, empty void. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. I could only stare at her, my mind struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. And then she turned. Slowly, almost gracefully, she pivoted to face me. Her head tilted to the side, as if she were studying me. Though she had no eyes, I could feel her gaze, cold and penetrating, boring into my soul. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt a wave of terror unlike anything I had ever known. And then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, she was gone. The next morning, I convinced myself it had been a nightmare, a manifestation of my grief and exhaustion. But as the days passed, the encounters became more frequent, more intense. I would see her in the corner of my eye, standing at the edge of the forest, or lurking in the shadows of the house. She never spoke, never made a sound. She simply watched me, her faceless gaze filled with an indescribable sadness. I began to research the history of the house, desperate for answers. What I found was a tale of horror that chilled me to the bone. The house had once belonged to a woman named Eleanor Blackwood, a reclusive artist who had lived there in the late 1800s. Eleanor was known for her hauntingly beautiful paintings, but she was also the subject of dark rumors, whispers of madness, of strange rituals conducted in the dead of night. And then there was the tragedy. One stormy night, Eleanor had disappeared. Her body was never found, but her final painting, a self-portrait, was discovered in the attic. It was a grotesque masterpiece, a depiction of Eleanor with her face erased, her features replaced by a smooth, blank canvas. The townsfolk claimed it was a curse, a punishment for her sins. They said her spirit still lingered in the house, trapped between this world and the next. As I read these accounts, I felt a growing sense of dread. Was Eleanor the woman I had seen? Was she trying to communicate with me? Or was she simply a malevolent presence, a ghost seeking vengeance? The encounters grew more intense, more personal. I would wake in the middle of the night to find her standing at the foot of my bed, her faceless visage inches from mine. I could feel her breath, cold and damp, against my skin. I could hear her voice, a faint, mournful whisper that seemed to come from within my own mind. "Help me," she would say. "Find me." I tried to ignore her, to convince myself it was all in my head. But the more I resisted, the more she tormented me. Objects would move on their own, doors would slam shut, and the temperature in the house would plummet without warning. I began to lose sleep, my mind fraying at the edges. I could feel myself slipping into madness. And then, one night, I couldn't take it anymore. I was in the attic, searching for anything that might explain Eleanor's presence, when I found it a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. Inside was a small, leather-bound journal. Its pages were yellowed with age, the handwriting cramped and hurried. It was Eleanor's diary. As I read, I learned the truth. Eleanor had been a woman consumed by grief. Her husband, a sailor, had been lost at sea, and she had never recovered from his death. In her despair, she had turned to dark rituals, desperate to bring him back. But something had gone wrong. Instead of summoning her husband, she had summoned something else, a malevolent entity that had taken control of her, erasing her face and trapping her soul in the house. The final entry was the most chilling. "It has taken me," she wrote. "I can feel it inside me, twisting my thoughts, my memories. It wears my face, but it is not me. I am lost, trapped in this endless darkness. Please, if anyone finds this, help me, set me free." I knew what I had to do. That night, I gathered the materials for a ritual, a reversal of the one Eleanor had performed. I lit candles, drew symbols on the floor, and recited the incantation from her journal. The air grew heavy, the shadows deepening as the entity began to manifest. And then she appeared. The woman with no face stood before me, her form flickering like a dying flame. I could feel her presence, a suffocating weight pressing down on me. But this time, I wasn't afraid. I was determined. "Eleanor," I said, my voice steady, "I'm here to help you." For a moment, there was silence. And then, slowly, her form began to change. The blank void of her face shifted, features emerging from the darkness. Her eyes, wide and pleading, met mine. Her lips parted, and she spoke. "Thank you," she whispered. The room erupted in a blinding light, and I felt a surge of energy, a release of something ancient and powerful. When the light faded, she was gone. The house was silent, the air warm and still. I felt a sense of peace, a weight lifted from my shoulders. Eleanor was free, and so was I. But as I left the attic, I noticed something on the floor, small, blackened mark like a burn, and in the center of it, a single word, etched into the wood: "Remember." I didn't know what it meant, but I knew one thing: the woman with no face was gone, but the house still held secrets, and as long as I lived there, I would never truly be alone. The rain began to fall again, a soft, steady rhythm that echoed through the empty halls. I sat by the fire, staring into the flames, and wondered what other horrors lay hidden in the shadows of Black Hollow. And then, just beyond the edge of hearing, I heard it, a faint, mournful whisper: "Remember."